Well, hello again, and welcome to another edition of the LNTV Election 2020 Roundtable. The Democrats have put forward a record number of candidates in an attempt to unseat President Trump, but does that bode well or ill for a party on the outside looking in? We'll consider that question and more with our chief political correspondent, Graham Noble, and our national correspondent, Joe Schaefer, and Liberty Nation's own legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza. So, Graham, no less than 24 Democrats are running for president. Does the size of the field, the fact that everyone and his brother seems to be running for president, help or hurt the Democrats as they try to get rid of President Trump?
Well, it's a good question, I guess, and I would say overall it probably helps more than hurts, I believe, because at this stage it's early days, but everyone's got a big field to choose from. I don't necessarily see a downside to having this many contenders at the beginning. I mean, the herd is going to thin pretty quickly, and I think having this many candidates right now just simply gives Democratic primary voters a wide choice. Maybe you could argue that it's too confusing, there's too many, but I think ultimately if you've really got to nail it down to whether or not it's a good or a bad thing, I would say it's probably more a good thing than a bad thing.
When it comes to the Democratic presidential field, bigger is not better. That was the headline recently in that bastion of journalistic integrity, the Washington Post. Joe, are they right?
I actually think they are right. I think that it's crazy to have this many candidates, most of whom I don't think are sincere candidates. You get a certain cachet for saying I ran for president, and you can actually even make money off of it if you can keep your campaign donations. I don't think it's not pushing issues forward, which of course is the problem in modern politics today. I think we saw this with the Republican field in 2016. There were candidates who shouldn't have been in there, in my opinion. They were on the junior debate table, and some of them were even in the bigger ones, but they didn't move the conversation forward, and they were all scrambling to talk over each other. I think the debates are going to be chaotic with the Democrats. It's going to be, if you recall Chris Christie's shooting down Russians in the flyover zone in 2016, we're going to see the Democratic version of this with 20 dwarfs trying to outdo each other in macho progressive talk. And that is not going to serve the American people well at all. It's going to make the Democrats look like fools. So President Trump's going to be pretty happy. But no, it's too big a field. It's not serious. And I think that it's not good for the national conversation at all.
Now, in 2016, the Republicans famously, when they had 16 candidates, they had an adults table and a kids table. They put were JV and varsity team. The JV team went the first night. The varsity team went the second night. The Democrats are claiming that they're not going to do that. They're not going to put Biden and Sanders and the guys and all the candidates who are atop the field all on one stage, and then the also-rans on the other. We'll see how that actually plays out. But Scott, Joe Biden is way ahead, basically about 20 points ahead in this race, ahead of Bernie Sanders, with all the rest trailing far behind Bernie. Do you think, Scott, that Biden's popularity is simply a function of Democrat rank and file voters rejecting the radical nature of most of these candidates?
No, Tim, I think incumbency is probably the reason. He is the immediate past vice president, and that accounts for some huge percentage of those votes, I think.
Okay, simple answer to a somewhat complicated question, but leave it to Scott to take complicated issues and make them as simple as possible. Now, we're going to engage in an exercise, gentlemen, that I think should be fun and hopefully rewarding. Every day, it seems, we hear a new radical, some would say, many would say, extreme proposal from one or more of these candidates. So each of you is going to get to select what you think is the most radical of all the radical ideas proposed collectively by the 24 candidates in the Democratic field. And Graham, we'll start with you.
Well, Tim, I think that once you are actually directly attacking constitutional rights and threatening to basically nullify them, that is the biggest problem for me. And so therefore, I'm going to go on this one with Eric Swalwell of California as being the most radical, because Swalwell never met a gun control bill that he didn't like. He's pushed a number of them in Congress, infringing on Second Amendment rights from all different angles. But more than any of the other candidates, and of course all of the Democrats are basically anti-Second Amendment, but more than any of the other candidates, Swalwell is going one step further, because he's actually talking more or less about gun confiscation. I mean, he's talking about introducing what he calls a government buyback program, whereby the government, you hand in your semi-automatic long guns and the government gives you some money for them. But the thing is, he's backing that up by saying, and if you don't participate in the buyback program, then we'll come and throw you in jail. And so I think, to me, that's a huge problem. When he's talking about actual gun confiscation, he's also talking about, registering firearms and requiring everybody to get a federal license. And he pushes bills. He's pushing one bill in Congress that he calls the no fly, no buy bill, which basically means that if you are on a terrorist watch list, not only are you not allowed to purchase firearms, but also you are required to hand in all of the firearms that you currently own or be subject to criminal prosecution. And my problem with that is that if you think about how many times the radical left have described conservatives as terrorists merely for expressing their opinions and talking about their values, that worries me. If you're going to start to say, well, if you're on a terrorist watch list, you can't buy guns and you have to hand in all the guns you own, because all of us here could very easily end up on a terrorist watch list just by expressing our opinions.
Tim, I want to say that I don't agree. Graham speaks for himself. I should not be added to any watch lists at all.
Well, you're on our watch list, Scott, but that's just an in-house thing. The thing is, there are so many radical proposals flying all over the place in this Democratic primary that Eric Swalwell's gun control measures make even Cory Booker's look somewhat moderate by comparison. And Cory Booker he doesn't even want to pay people to take their guns away. He's issued like a 20-point manifesto, which is truly frightening for gun owners. But there's so many radical proposals and so little time. So let's move on to Joe with your selection, Joe, for the most radical of all the extreme proposals being run out by Democrats.
Yeah, I'll change the topic just because I think that gun control is an excellent choice, and that is really frightening. But what Kirsten Gillibrand said on CBS Face the Nation, I believe it was May 19th, that she would not detain a single illegal alien who's snuck into this country. She's going to give them all lawyers, and she's going to just let them loose in the interior of the nation, where it's been proven that these people don't show up for their court dates. Why would they? They just want to get into the country. It's hard to tell how serious she is with these kind of things, because she's been pandering so shamelessly, just throwing progressive issues on the wall and hoping something would stick. But then again, she probably does believe this. The Democrats have gone in this direction. And if they want to do that, I mean, just let's not even have a border. It's so radical. It's so extreme. It would destroy the very fabric of this nation to say we're not going to take border security seriously at all, because we'd rather paint Trump and Republicans as racist bad guys instead. Are these serious people? Are these adults? Is this a party that we can trust with any kind of leadership positions at all. And for Jill to say, even the CBS broadcaster who was friendly towards her was shocked that she was saying this.
Really saying something.
Yeah, I was really saying so. It's like, I mean, yeah, we know you want to be progressive, but can you be a little bit serious? And it seems like the Democrats, no, they don't even want to be serious. They just want to go as hard left as they possibly can.
And I think they do so, not even considering the extent to which Trump and the Republicans will try to define the Democratic Party on the basis of the most extreme proposals or outlandish controversies. I can envision Donald Trump during debates with the eventual nominee throwing out all these ideas that were proposed by these fringe candidates and saying, well, what is it, Mr. Biden or Mr. Sanders or Ms. Harris or whatever? Do you stand for that or don't you? Put him right on the spot. Okay, Scott, it's your turn for the most outrageous or extreme of Democratic ideas for the 2020 campaign.
Tim, it's not a close call. The most extreme, outlandish of these is Kamala Harris's statement on last week's town hall broadcast from MSNBC. During that broadcast, she said that when she was president, I love the when, by the way, it's a great candidate term.
Right.
When she becomes president, she's going to enact a new rule whereby states that have had previous instances where they've passed legislation that frustrated women's attempts to get abortions, all their new state laws having to do with abortions would first be passed through her executive department, the Justice Department, and only then, after the Justice Department ruled that they were okay, could they then become force of law. Tim, I don't know where to begin when I discuss the outrageous nature of this policy proposal. First of all, it shows that she literally has no idea about how the relationship between the states and the federal government exists. To enact such a change, it would require at least one, if not multiple, constitutional amendments, because it completely rearranges how the states and the federal government, deal with one another. It's so fantastic. I had to re-listen to it a couple times, and I really do think this is one of those things where if a Republican said it, it would be disqualifying to their candidacy. In other words, they would be so mocked because of their inability to understand. I mean, for the president or somebody who wishes to be president to state publicly that they don't understand how our system works, well, there you go.
Well, they just want to change the system. I mean, I think that's the message, is that they don't like the system.
She's the former Attorney General of California, too. You wonder, like, how did she get by if that's what she thinks is, or was it just a pandering line to the audience, perhaps? I don't know.
But I think implicit in that, Scott, is the idea that most of these Democrats, they don't want to uphold the system. They don't want to sustain the constitutional republic. They want to transform it. The fundamental transformation of America. That's what Obama said 5 days before the 2008 election, and he did his best to make that come to pass. I'll just disagree with one thing you said, Scott. I would say it is close between all the various radical proposals, because there's so many of them, and so many of them are so extreme and unlike anything we've ever seen put forward outside of the extreme fringes of the two parties, that it is hard to pick. Because none of you have mentioned the candidates who said that they not only wouldn't build a wall, but if Trump builds one, they would tear it down. You've not covered reparations for the descendants of slavery, which ended 150 years ago, prisoners, violent criminals who are still in prison being allowed to vote. Bernie Sanders put that one forward. There's, of course, the Green New Deal, which is so extreme that it would pretty much almost immediately shut down the entire American economy. There's Medicare for All, which would be a government takeover of healthcare. There's allowing 16-year-olds to vote, which even Nancy Pelosi has supported. There's packing the Supreme Court, as FDR tried to do almost 100 years ago. But to me, I'm going to pick abolishing the Electoral College, because that's the thing that would completely transform how we elect presidents. Now, of course, the Democrats have lost 2 elections in this century, in which they won the popular vote. In 2000, Al Gore won more popular votes, lost the election. 2016, Hillary Clinton won the popular vote and lost the election. So the obvious response from Democrats in their one-step thinking is, well, let's just abolish the Electoral College. And of course, it was put in place in order to make sure that the states in flyover country were represented. But if you had a straight popular vote, all the candidates would spend all their time in Los Angeles and New York and Chicago and Miami and Atlanta and the big cities. So that is fundamental to the American constitutional republic, this electoral college, which is unlike any other country. So it's hard to pick between all of them, but I thought I'd bring that one forward. Final thoughts from each of you before we finish up here today. Graham?
Well, it's it's hard to really sum this up. What is happening? It's unprecedented, I would say, and it is just insanity. And I think what is happening here basically is that that pendulum of politics swings from right to left, and often once it swings one way, it swings back the other way more extremely. For instance, Jimmy Carter gave us Ronald Reagan, and Barack Obama gave us Donald Trump. And Donald Trump, if he is not succeeded by a Republican, then the pendulum, I fear, will swing back much more further to the left than it has been before.
Indeed, I think that's a good point, Graham, that each election is a reaction to the last election. Joe, final thoughts?
My final thoughts are to re-echo what I said earlier, that impressive laundry list of insanity on the part of Democrats that you ran off. It's only going to get worse. We haven't even gotten to the debates yet, when they're going to be trying to one-up each other, and it's just going to accelerate into this cyclone of lunacy, and it's going to be televised across this nation. I hope that people really react. The American people get repulsed just by the pandering nature of it. Even if you are sort of sympathetic to liberal ideas, you should say, these people are pandering. They are not taking us seriously. So I hope there's going to be a counter reaction to this. I was disgusted by a lot of the 2016 Republican debates, to tell you the truth. And it's what helped Trump stand out, that he actually ran on substantial issues. And I really hope these Democrats don't get away with it, that they don't get away with not talking about the things that are important to the American people. I just can't wait till these debates to start. And I just hope they really do make fools of themselves and they get called on for it.
Well, what do you think, Scott? Well, these upcoming Democratic debates, there'll be one later this month, one in July, then one in September. Do you think it's going to be must-see TV or something that you're going to need to avert your eyes?
Well, as a political junkie, Tim, I'll be there early to be sure. I can't turn away. I wanted to say that of the list, the parade of horribles that you gave, I find the elimination of the Electoral College the least odious of those. And if I put my social scientist hat on, I wonder, like, for instance, in California, if you're a Republican in California, unless you're inland, what's your motivation to go to the polls? Just to see every candidate you ever want to vote for be defeated? Well, if we eliminate the Electoral College, I think there are millions and millions of California Republicans who may actually come out to the polls in a way that I don't think those Democrats are expecting. There are still some left behind enemy lines out there,
Well, that in one sense is true. And of course, the Democrats, in getting rid of the Electoral College, would be getting rid of their sort of 54 automatic electoral votes in California. There are 30 plus electoral votes automatically in New York and in Illinois and in Massachusetts. I mean, so they might be cutting off their nose to spite their face with that particular proposal. Well, that's about all the fun we're allowed to have this week, gentlemen. I appreciate it. Graham Noble and Joe Schaefer and Scott Cosenza, and we'll be back next week with another thrill-packed edition of the LNTV Election 2020 Roundtable. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Subscribe to the LibertyNation.com YouTube channel, where you'll get more stuff than you even have time to watch. But it will all be worth it. I'm Tim Donner. Thanks for joining us.